Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Tip. My name is Julian, and today I will be doing my own fantasy version of the Seattle expansion draft now that we know the protected lists. Now, I know it's been a while since my last video, guys, but I am back today and I am excited to be recording another video. Before we get started, guys, please leave a like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I would really appreciate all of your support. So getting right into it, guys, I'm using the draft simulator on capfriendly.com. Basically, it already has all the players that are protected, and then it allows you to select players based on who's available to be selected. Now, I'm going to go and show you what I think that Seattle should do based on my opinion. And then I'm going to go and show you what I think Seattle's actually going to do. All right, so let's dive right into it. So let's go team by team. So I click here, draft team, and I look, well, Anaheim's got a lot of guys, a lot of names that are well-known that are not protected. Now, Getzlaf is a UFA this year, so you could try to sign him if you really wanted to, but it's kind of a waste of a pick to sign a UFA, right? Henrique's a decent option at 5.825. It's kind of expensive though, and the team has to be cap compliant. So Henrique, even though there's not that many centers out there, I avoided Henrique. Who I ended up going with was Josh Mahura. He's a pretty good prospect. He's got a pretty decent future, and he looks good when he's on the ice. He hasn't had that much time to shine, but he's only 23 and has a lot of time to develop. So I like the pick of Josh Mahura, and he's nice and cheap. Next, for the Arizona Coyotes, I picked up Ilya Lyubushkin because he's pretty cheap, and he's only got 1 year left, and he's a very good defenseman. He hits hard, and there's not that many great options from Arizona. The best thing other than that here is Michael Bunting. You can try to sign Michael Bunting in a free agency, but he's a UFA, so if you don't sign Bunting, then obviously Lyubushkin is the best option, in my opinion. Next, Boston Bruins. I think this one was a pretty easy one with Jeremy Lauzon. He's a very good prospect. He's 24 years old, so he's not that young, but he's looking good, and he's someone who could definitely be an impact player for seasons to come. Now, there's other options like Casho or Nick Ritchie, but, I mean, those guys are both RFAs, so who knows how much they're going to be asking for. It's a pretty safe bet to go with Lauzon, who is nice and cheap, at least for one more season. All right, for Buffalo, there's literally no one I actually want on this list. Like, my mind immediately goes to Cody Eakin because Vegas had him in the expansion draft, but it's pretty expensive. Like, that's going to take up a lot of cap. So, yeah, he's an okay ad, but I don't love his salary at 2.25 mil. I'm leaning more towards someone who's going to be a rookie who has the potential. So I looked around and like, there's nobody. Everyone's pretty old already. So the closest there is William Borgen. So I think they're either going to take him or they're going to take Dustin Tokarski, who looked really good last year. He'll probably be a fourth goalie on Buffalo, a fourth goalie for Seattle, just like he was on Buffalo last year. And because of Buffalo's all the injuries, he ended up playing and looked pretty decent. So for a fourth goalie, you know what? Pick Tokarski because I don't really see much potential in anybody here. Now for Calgary, it's the same kind of thing. There's not a lot of options, right? The glaring one is Mark Giordano. He only has 1 year left. He's got a pretty high cap hit at 6.75 mil, but I kind of like picking him just because of he only does have that 1 year, right? So he's not going to take up a crazy amount of cap for a long time. So if you do want to re-sign him, well, he's not going to be too expensive, right? And Giordano's a great veteran. He can teach the younger guys that they're going to draft. And I think he's a great guy to have, especially for that first season. Maybe even give him a captaincy right away. Going to the Carolina Hurricanes, I was between two players. Between Nino Niederreiter for 5.25 and Jake Bean. And ultimately, I went with Jake Bean just because defensemen are much more valuable. And Jake Bean's only 23 years old, and this guy's got so much potential in the NHL. This guy could potentially be their #1 defenseman off the bat. He could be top power play, and that would give this guy so much confidence going into it the season right away. And if he does get all those things that I just mentioned, he could be an absolute beast this coming year. Going to Chicago, there's no one I love all that much. But there's a couple of options. Like most of these guys are UFAs, so there's nothing too exciting. But I did end up selecting Zadorov. Dahan is another option. They're both defensemen that hit a lot, and they're decent defensemen all around. So I do think they're going to end up taking Zadorov just because he's a little bit cheaper than Dahan. Next, Colorado Avalanche, and I think almost everyone has the same pick. With the Colorado Avalanche, they're going to pick Jonas Donskoi, nice and cheap at $3.9 million, and he's a great second or third liner wherever they need to deploy him. He's pretty good all around, and I absolutely see them drafting him considering that he's locked in at that price for 2 more seasons. Columbus, I have them picking Max Domi, but I don't think that's necessarily locked in, as a lot of people do think. Max Domi is a good pick, but if they're going to be picking Max Domi, it's to be their top center. So I do think they're going to do this unless they decide to go the Ryan Johansson route in Nashville and pick him as their top center, because I don't think they're going to be able to afford both Domi and Johansson for their team. Therefore, they're going to have to pick one or the other. Stenlund at $874,000 is also a really, really good deal, and he's someone that they could go for as well. He's got 1 more year at that price, and then he's an RFA, so they could be able to sign him for hopefully pretty cheap as well. Now, the other guys available, not really calling my name too much, like Harrington, Gabriel Carlson. Yeah, they're decent, but I do think it's going to be down to Domi and Stenlund for Columbus. Now for Dallas, really, there's no one that I'm super crazy about. But Julius Honka probably does have the most potential out of everybody here. They could go and try to sign Alexiak. If they do that, good for them. That's a very good signing. He's a good defenseman. So if they do that, that's fine. Otherwise, I do think they're going to go for Julius Honka. They could even go for Ben Bishop, but he's been injured on and off for the past couple seasons. We don't really know how good he is anymore, and there's a lot of good goalies available, so I don't see that happening. Next, Detroit Red Wings. I have them selecting Evgeny Svechnikov, and I think this one's pretty straightforward because there's nobody there that I would like more than Evgeny Svechnikov. If you're a Wings fan, you like Evgeny Svechnikov. You know that he's a good player, and you know that the Wings have not given him the right opportunities to succeed. I do think that in Seattle, he will have that opportunity, and hopefully he can show just how good he is. The Edmonton Oilers, I have them selecting Oscar Klefbom, and I think a lot of people would agree with me on that one. Yeah, he missed the entire season last year, which is a little bit worrisome, but he's a very good defenseman, and he can be a top-pairing guy in Seattle right away. Florida. Now, I have them selecting Frank Vatrano, who's a great right winger, only 27 years old, and he's signed at $2.5 million for this coming season, which is really, really great. I think he's a very good player. I think he'll end up playing on their third line if they do go this route. Unfortunately, I'm hearing that Seattle is going and trying to sign Chris Driedger. Why? I honestly don't know, because Driedger's a good goalie, don't get me wrong. He's only 27. He's not too old, but I do think there are better goalies available in this expansion draft. Personally, I'd rather Kakkonen and Vitek Vanacek in this extension draft as my number 1-2 goalies, so I don't know why they're going after Driedger so avidly. But anyway, if they do go that route, it's not the worst idea in the world. But I honestly would prefer them draft Frank Vatrano. Next to LA, I think this is pretty straightforward. Brendan Lemieux, he's the best guy there. He's a gritty forward. He's great as a fourth liner, and he will be a very heart and soul guy for Seattle. Next to Minnesota, I have them drafting Kaapo Kähkönen. I think he's a great young goalie with a very, very promising future. Honestly, it's shocking to me that they've exposed him. Yeah, Talbot's been great, so it's obviously hard to expose Talbot. But man, Kaapo Kähkönen being exposed is pretty tempting. He's cheap, right? He's got 1 more year at $725,000, which is very, very tempting, right? So if they want to draft him, I think that'd be a great idea, although I don't necessarily see it happening if they do end up signing Driedger, because if they get Driedger, they're probably going to get Vanacek, and then Kähkönen, they're going to draft him as a third goalie? Probably not. So Minnesota might be safe there. I think if they don't end up taking Kähkönen, they'll probably end up taking Carson Soucy. Next is Montreal, and this is the team that everyone wants to know, right? It happens to be my favorite team as well, but Carey Price has waived his no move clause, and now they're saying that he might have to have knee surgery. So will Carey Price be selected by Seattle? Apparently, they're really, really looking into this, which is kind of crazy. As a Canadiens fan, I'm not sure if I should be excited by this or disappointed, because don't get me wrong, I absolutely love Carey Price, and he was phenomenal in this playoff run. But this guy's got a lot of years left on his contract. He's got 5 seasons left, and he's already 33, right? And it's a $10.5 million contract. So, yeah, if the Canadiens are able to win the Cup in the next year or two, them taking Carey Price away from us is a really bad thing. But if the Habs weren't destined to win the Cup in the next couple of years, well, taking Carey Price off our books is probably not the worst idea in the world. He's $10.5 million, which is really expensive. So the Habs will be able to spend elsewhere. So if they do end up taking Carey Price, it's not so bad. I think it's a win-win for the Montreal Canadiens. But I do end up thinking that Seattle takes Cale Fleury, who's a very good defensive prospect, only 22 years old, a good right-hand defenseman. He can develop for another year or two in the minors, and then he could probably get a permanent roster spot on Seattle. Also worth noting that I think they could also draft Drouin if they think Drouin will play for them, because Drouin had this whole thing this year where I think it was mental health issues that he wasn't playing for Montreal. I think it was too much pressure here in Montreal. So Seattle does think that Drouin will end up playing for them. Then absolutely they could draft Drouin, although he is a little expensive as well. Now for Nashville, I have them selecting Colton Sissons. Colton Sissons is locked in at $2.85 million, which is not super cheap, but it's not super expensive either. And this guy's a phenomenal third liner. This guy is good all around. He can play center, he can play left wing, he can play right wing. And with the right line mates, this guy could actually produce, and he's very, very good defensively as well. Now, Seattle could very easily decide to go with Ryan Johansson. And if they do, like I said before, they're not going to draft Max Domi. Personally, I have them taking Sissons because I like Sissons as a third line center, and Johansson has kind of gone down hill a little bit in the last couple of years. So I prefer Sissons, although I don't think Johansson is that bad of a pick. All right, so for the New Jersey Devils, I have them taking Will Butcher, not PK Subban, not Nick Merkley, just because Subban's too expensive. Will Butcher's got some potential, and Nick Merkley is okay, but I like Will Butcher a little bit better. Next, we're moving on to the Islanders. They have 2 great big names, Eberle and Bailey, and I think Eberle is the better player here, even though he's $500,000 more, so I do think he's going to end up being taken, and he's going to immediately be their second line right winger, which is fantastic for him. And honestly, for that franchise, they got some big names off the bat. That's great for them. Now, for the Rangers, I have them selecting Julien Gauthier. He's nothing too special, but he could potentially be a decent third liner one day. He's only 23, so he's got some room to improve. I don't absolutely love him, but there's not that much better that they can really take from the Rangers here. Moving on to the Ottawa Senators, I have them selecting Joey Daccord, and a lot of people probably have him selecting Dadonov, but he didn't have that great of a season last year. He's locked into a $5 million contract, and yeah, I think they would take on that contract if they could afford it, but they do have to meet a salary cap. So it may be difficult for Ottawa to meet that salary cap. For Seattle to meet that salary cap. To be below that salary cap. So they're probably going to end up drafting a few really good players that are expensive and then grabbing a bunch of cheaper guys. And Daccord is going to make for a great third goalie. Moving on to Philadelphia, there's 3 names that really stick out here, and those are Voracek, JVR, and Gostisbehere. Gostisbehere is way too expensive. I mean, so are Voracek and JVR, but I think JVR is the best value here. Just because he's $7 million, and yeah, that is very expensive, but he's locked in for only 2 years. Whereas Voracek's over $1 million more than that, and JVR will immediately be your top line left winger. And he brings some brand name value to Seattle, and the fans will know him right away. Moving on to Pittsburgh, they traded away McCann so that McCann wouldn't be selected, but now Tandem's going to be selected anyway. So it's $3.5 million off the books. He's a heart and soul guy. He hits really hard. He's going to lead the league in hits probably next year. So Seattle will really appreciate a guy like that. He's a little expensive, but for what he brings, he's totally worth the money. Moving on to the San Jose Sharks, and there's really nobody available here. So I have them selecting Ryan Donato. He's getting a little bit older at 25, but I do think he still has some potential to become a better player. I think he'll start off as their fourth line center, and hopefully he can show what he really is made of. Moving on to St. Louis, and this is a no-brainer. We got Vladimir Tarasenko right here. Great player. Unfortunately, has been hit with some injuries lately, and he wanted out of St. Louis. And he's not going to be traded, apparently. Apparently, he's going to be taken in the expansion draft, because if the Seattle Kraken select anybody but St. Louis, but Tarasenko, they're absolutely crazy. Tarasenko will be their superstar right off the bat, assuming he can stay healthy, and that is a fantastic selection. He should be their number one player, and he should be the number one guy that they want to grab. Moving on to Tampa Bay, they got four guys who are really big names in Palat, Gord, Tyler Johnson, and Killorn. And I can see them grabbing any one of these four guys, although if they do grab Tyler Johnson, it's because Tampa fed them a couple of picks or prospects to make them take Tyler Johnson off their books because he is expensive at $5 million. But I do think they're going to end up grabbing Palat. He's a great player, and I really, really do think that he will make a great addition to the Seattle Kraken roster. Moving on to Toronto Maple Leafs, they just traded for McCann to hope. I think they did it to bait Seattle into grabbing McCann, and I think it's going to work. I think that they're going to grab Jared McCann, and I think they also did it because McCann is a centerman, and so if Seattle were to grab Kerfoot, they would have McCann as a backup, and if they grab McCann, they would still have Kerfoot as their third line center. So the Leafs made sure to still have a third line center no matter what happens. The other guy that's a possibility for them to grab is Travis Dermott, who's a good defenseman, has a couple of years at a very cheap contract. But in the end, I do think they're going to grab McCann as their third line center. I think he is a very, very good third line center, and he really showed what he could do in Pittsburgh last year. For Vancouver, there's nobody that I like, really. So they're probably going to end up grabbing one of the younger guys, a Cole Lind here, or a Lucas Jacek, or a Jonah Gadjevich. I don't really know which one they're going to end up targeting. Even a Matthew Heimer is an option. But I think they are going to go for one of these young guys who can hopefully bloom into someone who can be a pretty decent player. Moving on to Washington, I think the only option they really have here is Vitek Vanacek. If they don't take Vitek Vanacek, I think they're absolutely crazy. He had a great season last year, and he has so much potential, and he's really cheap too. Moving on to Winnipeg, and I think it's between one of two guys. It's going to be either Sam Niku or Mason Appleton, and I think Niku has this slight edge just because Vegas prioritized defense in their expansion draft because they were able to trade some defense afterwards. So I think Seattle might do the same thing and try to get a few picks from extra defense that they got and then hopefully are able to ship to other teams. Now if you click the top button on this expansion draft, bring you all the way to the top and you can press the View Team button and look at that. You can check out your team. So when all is said and done, guys, my lines are JVR, Domi, Tarasenko top line, Palat, McCann, Eberle second line, Donskoy, Sissons, and Vetrano third line, and Tanev, Donato, Lemieux on the fourth line. Then we'll have Giordano and Lauzon, Klefbom and Ligushkin, and Bean and Zadorov on defense. And in goal, we have Vanacek and Kakkonen. And in white here, you guys can see all the subs, all the alternate players that can sub into the lineup. Now, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but I think they're going to probably end up signing Drieger, which means they're not going to end up selecting Vetrano, which I still think might be a little bit silly, but you know what? Maybe it's not the worst strategy in the world. We'll see. So if that's the case, I don't see them selecting Kakkonen, and instead I see them selecting Susie from Minnesota, and then instead of Lyubushkin from Arizona, I have them signing Michael Bunting. So let's see. Let's wait and see, guys, how accurate I am for this expansion draft. I honestly could be completely wrong, except for Tarasenko, because they would absolutely be nuts to not sign Tarasenko. I could honestly have every single other player wrong, but who knows? Let's see how accurate I am, guys, and I cannot wait until Wednesday. I'm sure you guys are very excited, too, to see exactly what ends up happening in that expansion draft. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Please leave a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. I really appreciate all your support all year round, and thanks for watching this video. Until next time, guys, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Fantasy Tipped.